My son is 26 years old and he still can't fold a fitted sheet. I know this because I taught him everything I know about laundry when he was 12, and the fitted sheet lesson never stuck. He'd just ball it up and shove it in the closet. Every time I'd open that linen closet and see that lumpy mess, I'd shake my head and smile. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand the kind of relationship we have. We talk. We laugh at the same dumb things. He calls me on his lunch break sometimes, just to tell me something stupid that happened at work. Not because he needs anything, just because he thought I'd find it funny too. That's my son. That's who he is. His name is Joel. He's a civil engineer, works for a firm downtown, good at his job, careful with money. Or so I thought. He got my stubborn streak and his mother's charm, which means he's persuasive enough to talk his way into things and too proud to admit when he's in over his head. I want to be clear about something before I go any further. What happened last Thanksgiving didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of 15 years of quiet preparation that I never thought we'd actually need. I used to travel for work. Back when Joel was around 10 or 11, I was gone 2, sometimes 3 weeks a month. His mother and I had already separated by then, and he was living with me full time. My choice, a reluctant agreement, a whole other story. So it was just the two of us in a house that felt too big, with a routine we were still figuring out. I worried constantly. Not about the big obvious things, but about the small ones. What if something happened and he couldn't reach me? What if he was in a situation where he couldn't speak freely, couldn't say what was wrong in front of whoever was around? I'd read too many stories. A kid at a friend's house, an adult in the room making things uncomfortable, a teenager in a car with someone who'd been drinking. Situations where you can't just say, hey, something's wrong, come get me. So one night, Joel was 11, maybe just turning 12. We were sitting at the kitchen table after dinner. I'd been away for 10 days and we were catching up on everything. At some point, I slid my coffee mug across the table and I said, hey, I want to show you something. I turned the mug upside down. I told him, if you ever flip your cup upside down when I'm around, I know something's wrong. You don't have to say a word. You don't have to explain. I'll find a way to get you alone, and you can tell me then. Until then, I'll just act normal. He looked at me like I'd suggested we learn Morse code. Dad, that's kind of dramatic. I said, I know. But let's keep it anyway. We practiced it a couple times over the years. Once when he was 14 and wanted to leave a party early but didn't want to be the one to say so. He texted me. I called with a fake emergency, picked him up, and we got burgers at midnight and didn't tell a soul. Another time when he was 17, more serious, a situation with a guy in his friend group who made him uncomfortable. He flipped his cup at Sunday dinner. I got him outside within 10 minutes. We talked it through, handled it quietly. By the time he was in college, the signal had become something we almost joked about. He'd flip his mug sometimes when I made bad coffee, just to be funny. I'd say, is this a real emergency, or are you critiquing my brew? He'd grin and turn it right side up. We hadn't used it for real in almost 8 years, until last Thanksgiving. Joel had been dating someone new since around late summer. Her name was Claudia. He mentioned her in August, casually, the way he mentions most things, like he's testing whether I'm going to make a big deal out of it. I didn't. I just asked what she did. She worked in financial services, he said, private wealth management, something along those lines. I said, that's interesting. He said, yeah, she's smart. He brought her up a few more times over the fall, not constantly. Joel isn't the type to talk endlessly about whoever he's seeing, but enough that I could tell this one was different. She came up in the context of places they'd gone together, things she'd said that impressed him. Once he mentioned she'd introduced him to some of her colleagues at a networking event. He said it like it was just a detail. I filed it away. When I finally met her at Thanksgiving, she was exactly what I expected from the way he'd described her, and also somehow more. She was polished, mid-30s, dark hair, good posture, the kind of confident that reads as warmth until you look a little closer. She knew how to enter a room. She asked my sister thoughtful questions about her work, remembered details from the first answer, and wove them back into the conversation later. She complimented my brother-in-law's wine choice by name. Not just this is good, but oh, this vineyard. I heard they had a difficult harvest year but pulled through. The kind of thing you say when you want people to know you're a certain kind of person. It wasn't that any of it was fake, exactly. It was that it was too consistent. Like every sentence had been optimized, but I didn't say any of that. I smiled. I passed the stuffing. I talked about football with my brother-in-law. Joel seemed relaxed. She seemed comfortable. I told myself I was being suspicious for no reason. Then, about halfway through the meal, I reached for the gravy and I happened to glance across the table. Joel's coffee mug was upside down. He was mid-sentence talking to my sister about some hiking trail they'd both been to, laughing at something she'd said. He didn't look at me, didn't make any signal with his face. Just kept the conversation going like nothing had happened. But the mug was upside down. I put the gravy down. I took a bite. I chewed slowly. I looked at Claudia, who was laughing at something my nephew had said at the other end of the table, completely at ease. I looked back at Joel. He still didn't look at me. I said to no one in particular, I'm going to check on the pie, and I got up. About 4 minutes later, Joel appeared in the kitchen doorway. I handed him a dish towel I didn't need him to use. He started drying a pot that was already dry. How long? I asked. I didn't say what I was asking about. He said, since September. What kind? He was quiet for a second. Investment opportunity. A fund. She introduced me to a colleague. I kept my voice completely even. What's the name of the fund? Pinnacle Growth Strategies. I'd never heard of it. That alone wasn't anything. There are thousands of small funds, but the way he said it, just slightly too steady, like he'd rehearsed saying it casually, told me more than the name did. How much have you moved so far? He set the pot down. 14,000. I didn't react. I turned off the faucet. I leaned against the counter and I looked at my son, who was standing there with a dish towel in his hands, looking about 15 years old. Has she shown you any documentation? Yeah. Prospectus, account statements, the whole thing. What firm holds the assets? He told me a name I also didn't recognize. I asked if he'd called the firm directly. Not through any number Claudia or her colleague had given him, but a number he'd found himself. He hadn't. I nodded. Okay, I said. Go back out there. Act normal. Don't say anything. He went. I stood in that kitchen for 2 minutes just breathing. Then I went back to the table and talked about football. That night, after everyone had gone home and Claudia had driven away in her car, Joel came back. He sat down at my kitchen table, same table we'd been eating at for 20 years, and he put his head in his hands. I sat across from him with my laptop. We started with Pinnacle Growth Strategies. No SEC registration. No FUNRE listing. The website looked professional. Clean design. Stock photography of glass office buildings. A few headshots of team members that reverse image searched back to a stock photo site. The address on the site was a WeWork shared office space in Chicago. Then we looked at the custodial firm where Joel's money supposedly lived. There was a real firm with a similar name. 1 letter off. The account statements Claudia had provided used the real firm's logo, the real firm's formatting, but the account numbers didn't match any structure the real firm used. I know this because we called their actual customer service line at 9:30 at night and sat on hold for 20 minutes until someone answered. Joel was very quiet through all of this. When we'd confirmed enough, I closed the laptop. He said, I thought I was being smart. She showed me everything. It all looked right, I said. It's designed to look right. That's the entire job. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, she's been doing this a long time, hasn't she? I said I didn't know. Probably. People who are good at this don't get good quickly. She never asked me for cash, he said. It was all wire transfers. Legitimate-looking account numbers. She even sent me a 1099 form last January for some minor returns. I filed it with my taxes. I told him that was the hook. The 1099 was real because she'd processed a small genuine return to establish credibility. Classic structure. Get someone to file paperwork on a real gain, and they stop questioning whether the whole thing is real. Joel put his hands flat on the table. I almost put in 40 more. She was pushing me toward a second tranche. She called it an opportunity window. Said the fund was closing to new investors in December. Artificial urgency. Also classic. I asked him what he wanted to do. He had options. The wire transfer could potentially be traced. There were regulatory bodies to contact, a lawyer to talk to. None of it was certain. Some of it would probably cost money and time with no guaranteed recovery. He looked up at me. Why didn't you say anything at dinner? You knew right away, didn't you? When I turned the mug, I said, because she was right there. Because I needed to understand how much you knew and how much had already happened before I said a word. Because the worst thing I could have done was confront her at my sister's Thanksgiving table when I didn't have the full picture yet. He nodded slowly. The signal worked, I said. You remember the first time I used it for real, he said. I was 14. That party at Derek's. I said I remembered. I didn't want to seem scared, he said. I didn't want to be the kid who called his dad. But I also knew if I just flipped the cup, I didn't have to explain anything right then. I could just tell you I needed help without having to say it out loud. I said, that's why we made it. He was quiet again. Then, I should have flipped the cup in September. I said, maybe. But you flipped it when you were ready to. That counts. We reported everything the following week. His bank's fraud department, the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center, IC3, if you don't know it, bookmark it, because it's where financial fraud and wire fraud complaints go. And we spoke to a securities attorney for an initial consultation. We also filed a complaint with the SEC's online tip system, which took about 20 minutes and asked surprisingly specific questions. Claudia did not respond to any of Joel's subsequent messages. Her phone number was disconnected within 4 days of Thanksgiving. Her Instagram, which Joel showed me, carefully curated several thousand followers, photos from what looked like a well-traveled life, disappeared the following week. The colleague she'd introduced him to was also unreachable. The LinkedIn profiles they'd both had were gone. The $14,000 has not been recovered. Possibly it never will be. Joel knows this. He's accepted it better than I expected, which either means he's genuinely at peace or he's doing that thing where he files the pain somewhere quiet and deals with it later. He'll tell me which, eventually. That's how we work. What I think about, though, what I keep coming back to, is not the money. It's the fact that she spent 4 months building something with my son. Thanksgiving dinner wasn't an accident. It was a milestone, getting into the family gathering, getting comfortable in that setting, becoming someone the family knew. That was part of the architecture of the con. Once you're at someone's Thanksgiving table, you're not a stranger anymore. You're almost family. And almost family gets the benefit of the doubt. She was good at what she did. I'll give her that grimly. She read Joel well, knew he responded to competence and intelligence, knew he'd be flattered by the access she gave him, knew he was careful enough to ask questions but not careful enough to ask the right questions. She introduced him to a colleague, which made it feel collaborative rather than a pitch. She didn't rush it. 4 months is patient work. But she didn't account for a coffee mug in 15 years. I called my sister the week after to fill her in. She was furious. Furious at Claudia. Then briefly furious at Joel for not saying anything sooner. Then just sad in the way that happens when you realize something you trusted turned out to be hollow. She asked me how I'd known at dinner. I told her about the mug. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You two really have your own language, don't you?" I said, "I guess we do." She asked if I thought Claudia would ever be caught. I said I didn't know. People like her are usually doing this in parallel. Multiple targets, multiple timelines, moving cities when things get close. The infrastructure disappears overnight because it was never real to begin with. But sometimes they get caught. Sometimes the victim files in the right jurisdiction at the right time and something sticks. I hope she gets caught, my sister said. I said me too. But more than that, I hope the next person she sits next to at a dinner table has someone in their corner like Joel had. Because that's the real gap. Not the fraud itself. Fraud has always existed, will always exist. The gap is having someone you trust enough to signal without words, and someone paying close enough attention to see it. A few weeks ago, Joel came over for Sunday dinner, just the two of us, nothing special. I made chili, we watched some football. He fixed the gutter on the back of the house that I'd been ignoring since October. When we sat down to eat, he put his coffee mug on the table, right side up. He looked at me over the rim when he picked it up to drink, and there was something in his expression that I don't have a clean word for. Not quite gratitude, more like recognition. Like we were both aware of the same quiet thing at the same time. I didn't say anything. I just nodded once and passed him the cornbread. Later, when he was putting on his coat to leave, he stopped at the door and said, "Hey, Dad." I said, "Yeah, we should probably come up with a second signal for the next time." I laughed. I told him I'd think about it. I've been thinking about it ever since. If you have someone in your life, a kid, a sibling, a parent, a friend, someone who might someday be in a room where they can't speak freely and need to reach you without words, make a signal. Make it simple. Make it something you can practice until it's second nature. Until it's almost a joke. Until the day it isn't. You probably won't ever need it. But if you do, you'll be glad you made it on a quiet evening 15 years before everything went wrong. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this happened. Not in a dramatic way. Just quietly, the way you do when something shakes you and then settles and you're left standing in your own kitchen trying to understand the sequence of events that led to a particular outcome. The $14,000 is probably gone. Joel knows it. I know it. We've made our peace with that, or we're in the process of making peace with it, which is the more honest way to say it. But here's what I keep coming back to. The money was always the smallest part of this. What Claudia built over 4 months wasn't a financial scheme, it was a relationship. She sat at a family dinner table. She asked my sister questions and remembered the answers. She'd complimented a wine by its vineyard name. She made herself feel like someone we'd known for a long time. And that's not an accident. That's a deliberate strategy. And it works because most of us are decent people who want to believe the people around us are decent too. That instinct isn't a flaw. It's actually one of the better things about us. She just knew how to use it. Joel is smart, he's careful with money. He has a good job and a level head, and he asks questions. None of that protected him because she was smarter about this specific thing than he was. She had more practice, and that's the hard truth about being deceived by someone skilled at deception. It doesn't mean you were foolish. It means they were experienced, and you weren't. The gap isn't intelligence, it's information. What I think saved him. The only thing that actually saved him was that he knew himself well enough to recognize when something felt wrong, even when he couldn't articulate why. He couldn't have explained it to me in words at that dinner table. He didn't have the full picture yet, but somewhere underneath the rationalizations and the optimism and the trust he'd extended to this person, he knew. And instead of talking himself out of that knowing, he acted on it. He flipped the mug. He didn't explain, didn't qualify, didn't wait until he was certain. He just sent the signal. That took something. I don't think it's a small thing to trust your instincts when everything around you is telling you they're wrong. That's not easy. That's a kind of courage that doesn't get talked about much. The courage to say, quietly, without drama, I think something is off, and I need help, before you have proof, before you can defend the feeling. I think about the version of events where he didn't flip the mug, where he sat through that dinner and talked himself back into certainty by the time dessert came, where he wired the second $40,000 in December before I ever knew anything was wrong. That version exists. It very nearly happened, and in that version no one did anything wrong except trust someone they shouldn't have. The signal mattered, but what mattered more was the 15 years that made the signal possible. The Sunday dinners and the late-night pickups and the conversations that went nowhere and the ones that went somewhere important. You can't build that in a crisis. You can only use what you already built. So if there's anything I want to leave with you, it's this. The protection you're building right now, in the ordinary moments, is the protection that will show up when you actually need it. The conversations you have before anything is wrong, the trust you establish before there's any reason to need it, the signal you practice until it becomes a joke, until the day it isn't. Joel is fine. He's going to be fine. Last Sunday, he came over and ate 2 bowls of chili and fixed my gutter and drove home in the dark. When he left, he said, we should come up with a second signal. I told him I'd think about it. I have been.